We're here for another edition of Hiking Nation Stories, and I'm here with a very important person for Hiking Nation, and that is Paul Pritchard. And we are in his home today, and it's a lovely home, Paul. And you've certainly surrounded yourself with the beauty of nature, which he's going to talk to us a little bit about in terms of his background of not only Hiking Nation and some of the things he did for Hiking Nation, but really he considers himself even more of a natural preserve and nature person. We've got all his books here, and it shows a little bit about his progression in life. You know, his time as a veteran in the Vietnam War, and then some of the work he did for National Geographic, The American Idea, and then he's going to talk to us a little bit about prairie tallgrass, which happens to be one of my favorite subjects. So anyways, Paul, tell us a little bit about how you came into your life stories and conservation.
Well, Paula, I will tell you, in part, it was just good fortune, but also it was a special time in this country. It was the golden age of conservation of the environment, beginning with clean water and clean air and all those pieces of legislation that were passed by Congress in the 70s. And also the National Trails Act was just before that. If you remember Silent Spring, her book was just before that. All of those things came together in that period, and I was fortunate to be in a position where I could do the things I wanted to do. My first real exposure after coming back from Vietnam.
And this is your book that you wrote, right?
Yes.
If you're interested, A Young Man in War, this is Paul's story of his Vietnam experience.
One of those Amazon treasures, you know, of many millions.
Yes. So we'll put that one away.
And
for
so,
now.
You know, as a young infantry officer, but also as a Boy Scout, which was very important in my life, an Eagle Scout, you know, those experiences of being in nature in Kansas, where I grew up, and right on the Missouri-Kansas line, helped me appreciate the outdoors. But what really helped me was seeing the importance of how trails were part of a much broader vision. The problem that I began to see as I hiked on trails when I was in NOAA as a senior science manager in charge of the Pacific Ocean Basin, those states and territories, I would spend the weekends hiking. That was the best thing I could do. My wife was back in Washington. I had meetings on both sides of the weekend. So I go on the Pacific Coast and the Pacific Crest and all sorts of trails that were out, John Muir, all these trails. That was what I did on the weekend. The hikers out there, and then the hikers that I've got to know on the East Coast really were a different sort of mindset. The West Coast hikers, first of all, were not really that committed to trails.
At that time in the 70s?
At that time. They were more interested in the ability to bushwhack, to walk wherever you wanted to go. A hardened trail was not something that really had a lot of support.
Right.
The East Coast, that's what the Appalachian Trail is, you know, a hardened footpath, and most of the other walkways in the country. And I began to see the contrast between the two groups reflected in the trails that you have on both sides of the country. My experiences were in part also governmental. I was on Jimmy Carter's staff as his Chief of Natural Resources. In one of my most memorable experiences that Margaret Drummond, who was the head of the Georgia Appalachian Trail Club, thanked me for in the future letters and things like that. I was representing the governor in a meeting with the Forest Service. The Forest Service and the Georgia Trail Club were fighting over the location of clear cutting. The Forest Service wanted to clear cut right up to the trail.
Oh boy.
And in some cases move the trail so they could clear cut in patches there. And I was responsible for hearing this and then making the decision,
Right.
because Carter was very much a conservationist.
Yes.
He was very committed to the outdoors. We took him on river trips. We took him on all sorts of outdoor experiences that he wanted to go on. It wasn't our initiative. In most cases, it was his initiative.
I see.
And so we sat in this meeting. The Forest Service said, look, hikers don't hear the chainsaws right next to the trail. All they're interested in is a green tunnel. And those words stuck in my mind from that time on, because I knew the Forest Service didn't quite understand the significance of that whole experience.
Right.
The solitude, the listening and hearing yourself think, the ability to slow down your thinking processes. And so I went back to the governor and suggested the Forest Service should not cut by the trail.
I see. And that was along the Appalachian Trail.
That was along that. And then I went to Washington to head up the science programs for NOAA and had those wonderful experiences on the West Coast. And all this, for some reason, was drawing me into two things. One, the hiking experience, and the other, the realization that as a science manager, conservation was really about the environment, the health, the well-being of the people, of nature, things like that, the ocean. I came back, was offered the position as the first executive director of the Appalachian Trail Conference, realized then what a unique experience that was. We had, really at that time, the trail clubs were the dominant force through the conference. At that time it was called the conference. And the trail was really the domain of each of the hiking groups that had a particular section. And my objective was to get it so there was consistency of management, because you're walking through 13 states.
Yes.
You're walking through a number of national park and state parks and national forest areas. And all these things tended to have their own agenda. And so part of that experience was learning about how to get all these folks to work together, to be cooperative, committed to the Appalachian Trail. And that played out. And that was when I met my co-workers with the American Hiking Society.
Okay, well, we'll start with that on the next reel.
Okay.
All right. So that's Paul's beginning and some discussion and background on the Appalachian Trail.